Apple took away the iPhone 13 mini and in its place gave us the iPhone 14 Plus. But was that really the right call? Well, I'm not so sure it was, because while the iPhone 14 Plus may end up being a more popular phone than the 13 mini, I think that the iPhone 13 mini served a more unique and ultimately a better place in the iPhone lineup than we got with this. And the iPhone 13 mini might actually be one of the best iPhones you can buy in the iPhone 14 lineup. Let me clarify by going back a little bit though. Because when Apple introduced the iPhone 12 lineup, all bets were off on how much Apple was going to start off the newly redesigned phones. Up until then, you had LCD phones like the iPhone XR and the iPhone 11, which retailed for $750 and then $699, becoming the normal mainstream iPhones. Now, when Apple was getting ready to announce the new iPhone 12 models with the new redesign, well, these were the first iPhones that all had OLED display, so the price for the mini could have been drastically different, but it wasn't. It came in at that sweet spot price point of $699, which I think is just the hallmark iPhone, the normal iPhone price. The 13 mini was an improvement over the 12 mini too. It brought in a better camera, a better processor, and more importantly, better battery life than the 12 mini, so it could keep up with the normal sized iPhone 12's battery life. Even with the improvements to the mini though, sales remained low, and it seemed like the writing was on the wall that people just wanted bigger and bigger phones. Well, enter the iPhone 14 Plus, and now Apple has officially dropped the mini from the iPhone 14 lineup, and thinking this second bigger iPhone will attract more users. And for a time, I thought it would. I've been on the record saying that this phone would sell like hotcakes, and it would end up being the most popular iPhone 14 model. However, now I'm kind of doubting myself. And it really doesn't have anything to do with the phone itself. The iPhone 14 Plus is actually a pretty good phone. But the pricing strategy for it is all wrong. That's because the iPhone 14 retails for $900, and it's actually $929 unlocked. That's what I paid for my model. And yeah, that's an expensive phone, and it really does sit in an awkward pricing lineup. The regular 14 is $799, which may attract some customers with that cheaper price point, but honestly, $799 is still pretty expensive too. But the iPhone 14 Plus it's just weird at $899. I mean, for $100 more, or I guess in my case for $70 more, you can get an unlocked version of just an iPhone 14 Pro. Now, the 14 Pro doesn't have the bigger size, but it does come packed with enough new features like the dynamic island, an actual new chip, the A16 chip, and the bigger 48 megapixel camera sensor, which really does make you question if the 14 Plus is a good option when it's only $100 away from that Pro model. Even stepping up to the Pro Max is at most a $200 upgrade. Granted, $200 is a lot of money, but it's a pricing strategy that, let's be honest, favors the Pro models. And maybe it's the way Apple intended it. If you opt to buy an iPhone 14 Pro or an iPhone 14 Pro Max instead of an iPhone 14 or an iPhone 14 Plus, that's more money for Apple. That is a winning strategy in terms of getting you to spend more money, so I really can't fault them for that. But I also think it's potentially a strategy that could backfire for them and maybe miss some sales for different types of users, because I think that $699 price point of the mini was the magic price point of the iPhone, and it was nowhere near the $1,000 price point, which might make you second guess if you actually need a new iPhone this year. I think an iPhone 14 at $699 and then this iPhone 14 Plus at $799 makes way more sense, and it gives better separation between the normal and the Pro lineup. Now, because Apple didn't do that, it does actually give another phone a chance to actually shine in this lineup at what should have been the year of its demise. Yes, the iPhone 13 mini is still in Apple's lineup, and because the 14 is not a big upgrade this year, it's actually a really compelling choice now because it's priced at just $599, and I definitely think it's worth looking over one last time as an option in the current iPhone lineup. Alright, so listen, it's no secret that the iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Plus are pretty small upgrades this year. They keep the same design as the iPhone 13, technically the same A15 chip, although with one extra GPU core enabled, but still, The A15 chip and day-to-day performance, the 13 mini and the 14 Plus are exactly the same, and the only area where you'll potentially notice an improvement for performance is in gaming. But I'd argue that heavy iOS gamers shouldn't really be looking at the 13 mini anyway, and would be better suited with a regular sized or a Plus model. Now, the cameras on the 14 are an improvement over the 13, but just slightly. The main camera takes a sensor from Apple's 13 Pro series of phones, but the camera system itself is still very similar to the 13, which only had a wide angle lens and then an ultra wide angle lens. So even though there are improvements going into the 14's camera system, the two systems are actually pretty close. And let's be honest, the 13 took good photos, so both of these phones still take good photos. I would actually say the biggest difference between the 13 mini and the 14 Plus camera system is actually on the front-facing camera. The 14 gets a noticeable upgrade over the 13 because the 14 now supports autofocus on the front-facing camera and just gets a big jump up in overall quality for photos and videos. Speaking of video, another big advantage on the 14 is the ability to shoot in action mode, which can produce much more stabilized footage if you have enough light, and also the ability to now shoot cinematic mode in 4K at either 24 or 30 frames per second. The 13 mini is still just limited to shooting cinematic mode at 1080p, and it's locked at 30 frames per second. Now, there are some potential major features you should consider, depending on how you look at it between the 13 and the 14. And the first is that the 14 does support car crash detection, which could be helpful in the case of a severe car accident, but it's kind of a feature you hope you don't have to use, and if you have one of the current Apple Watches, well, those can also detect car crashes, so it could be a bit redundant. Secondly, the 14 will eventually be getting satellite connectivity in a future software update, so you can ping a satellite in emergencies if you're out of cellular coverage. However, I really can't comment on that feature yet because it's not available right now, but it is something to keep in mind. But again, it's a feature you hope you never have to use. You never want to have to ping a satellite and hold a phone up for 10 minutes to ping emergency services. You'll be happy if you do have it, but it's something you don't really want to have to use. Now, the biggest difference between the 13 mini and the 14 Plus is obviously the size. And I mean, you're going from the smallest modern iPhone design to one of the biggest. The 13 mini has a 5.4-inch display, and the 14 Plus has a 6.7-inch display. And yeah, it's almost comical how much smaller the 13 mini is when you put it side by side with the 14 Plus. I mean, the 13 mini basically fits under the entire camera section of the 14 Plus. The screens themselves are basically identical, though, in terms of quality. Both are OLED displays with beautiful colors and deep black levels, and both phones get up to 800 nits of full screen brightness and 1200 nits of peak brightness when watching HDR content. And unfortunately, both displays are also 60 Hz displays, so they don't have the adaptive 120 Hz ProMotion display for smoother scrolling and smoother animations. Now, display size and phone size is personal, right? It's a personal preference. I don't think you could say which display size is better than the other. There are pros and cons for picking either phone, but for the Plus, I'd say that its strengths are that the bigger display shows more content and is more immersive. So if you're playing a game or watching a video, you get a more immersive experience. And for me, typing on the bigger display is usually easier and results in me being more accurate with my key presses. However, there's also the downsides. The 14 Plus is unwieldy at times, and it's hard to operate with just one hand, and it takes up a lot of pocket space. The 13 mini feels so nice to use on the other hand. It feels pretty easy to reach most of the phone with just one hand. So while it may not excel with two-handed typing because it is smaller and more cramped, one-handed typing feels like a dream. And yeah, this phone has no problem fitting in any of my pockets. It just feels really nice to carry around with you. Again, it is a smaller display, so that also means less content on the display and a less immersive experience. Now, a bigger phone doesn't just mean a bigger display, it also means that the bigger size of the phone should mean better battery life. And granted, I haven't had full time to test the 14 Plus's battery life yet, and my 13 mini is over a year old, so doing like a side-by-side battery drain test would kind of be unfair. But Apple does give battery ratings on their website, and the iPhone 14 Plus is rated at 26 hours of continuous video playback, while the 13 mini is listed at 17 hours. That is potentially 9 more hours of battery life on the Plus model, and that is going to be a huge deal for people that are on their phone all day or use their phone for really battery-intensive tasks, like shooting a lot of video with it or playing hours and hours of games. I really don't have to belabor the point. Like, what else is there really to talk about? So much of this decision is going to come down to whether you want a big phone or a small phone. And while the 13 mini was technically removed from the lineup this year, in a way it kind of has a chance for a year of rebirth because it's so similar to the iPhone 14 that even picking the older model means you're not missing out on much. And it's likely even that these phones will receive the same number of iOS updates considering they both use an A15 chip. And listen, I am a self-proclaimed fan of the mini iPhone. Honestly, I wish Apple made a Pro version of the mini, so in a way, I am happy about it getting another healthy year of life, and at a cheaper price point. This, starting at $599, makes it a really good value this year, when the normal 14 costs $200 more at $1799, and then the 14 Plus is $300 more. Even more so than that, the mini iPhone, it was a unique experience. It felt different than using a regular iPhone or the bigger Max model. It's small, it's lightweight, it's so unobtrusive, and it's just a little bundle of joy. And I'm not sure Apple made the right trade-off here. Instead of getting a unique form factor, we basically get a worse version of the iPhone 14 Pro Max this year in the form of the iPhone 14 Plus. And even if it's a good phone, it's kind of hard to get excited about it when there's a better option with the same form factor. So even though you may have your eyes set on getting an iPhone 14 this year, you may want to reconsider, and you may, dare I say, want to consider the little phone that could. The iPhone 13 mini just one last time. All right, everyone, and that is my thoughts on Apple removing the mini iPhone in the lineup and kind of the iPhone 13 mini versus the iPhone 14 Plus in the current iPhone lineup. But let me know in the comments below, what phone do you think is better? Would you pick the iPhone 13 mini or the iPhone 14 Plus? Let me know your reasons why in the comments below. As always, though, if you liked this video and you found it helpful, please give me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, make sure you're subscribed, and hopefully I will see you all very soon in the next video. Take care, everyone.